So here are paintings. I don't know if you can see those, but Lady Simcoe is known for her diary, and she came to Burlington Heights to visit the Beasleys in 1796 with her husband, and she loved the Heights, and she started making a lot of sketches there. And these are the wash paintings. And this first one, you see, it's down by Burlington Bay, and Richard Beasley's houses by the bay there in 1796 are depicted. And this again is a view from down below the Heights, and these two are views from the Heights, looking out over Burlington Bay, across to the sandbar and the lake beyond. Here's a map. I don't know if you can see that too well. It doesn't come, does it turn up all right? This is of Burlington Heights. It was where he's marked where the settlers are. It's really Viscount Harding's map, which I found in his archives when I was doing some research. It's done before 1812, and he marks the settlers there, and you see a mark for Beasley and the Heights. And you notice that Burlington Bay is called Little Lake there. That was an old name for it. It was also called Macassa Lake and Geneva Lake, and it was Simcoe, when he arrived, who named it Burlington Lake after a place in England that kept that name. It was a difficult. That's the Niagara area, and I've given you that's where all the settlers' names are and so forth. It's quite gives you an idea of what it was like back then. Quite a distance between each settler's home, and then there are the boats that they used in those times. Richard Beasley had to take his goods by that type of boat. And he had to, at first, go all the way from where Hamilton is today, all the way up to Montreal. And that was quite a trip in those days. He had to go through the Lachine Rapids and so on, and those kind of boats. And he built a mill. He built a mill in the early days when it was Quebec, before it became Upper Canada. You had to get permission for mills, and that was very hard to get. So they were built clandestinely, but they had to have flour, and they had to have their boards made. And then in Ancaster, they built a big mill. Ancaster was the place that was developed mostly in those days. Hamilton was down in the valley, so it was rather treacherous to get down the hill to go there. So he built the mill in Ancaster, and now it's a restaurant if you ever go to the old mill. You can see how hard it was in those days. I missed that. Did I? Wait a minute. It was hard work. Oh, well, this is the coach. It was a losing proposition, the mail coaches in those days. And this is the sort of entertainment they had, the dancing. And then this is the legislature, the early legislature, where Richard Beasley and Hamilton and so forth attended in York. This is the hard work I tried to talk about. There they are threshing, and there's the Methodist circuit rider. Why the Methodists became so popular is that there were very few churches, and the Anglicans tried to establish themselves as the primary religion, the sort of state religion. And Richard Beasley was in Parliament at the time, and he was Speaker, and he helped defeat the bill that would have accomplished that, even though he was Anglican, because he didn't believe that there should be a state religion, which he earned the ire of Reverend Strawn, which followed him through his life, made life difficult for him later on. And there are the bridges. there is what Richard tried to do. He brought settlers into Markham with Berksey and the German company. They were from Germans, from Hanover and so on, who tried to settle in the United States and found it very difficult. People tried to make them indentured servants. So they came up here and tried to get going in Markham. And he also brought people into Waterloo County. Joseph Brant had approached him. Joseph Brant, the Indian Iroquois chief, asked him to help bring settlers in. And they had great difficulty with the government because the Indian Department, the people like the Johnsons and the Clauses, who were originally from New York State, and were loyalists, but they wanted to take over as controlling the Indians, which their father had done. They wanted to keep all that land under their own control. They didn't want Brant to siphon off part of it. Brant said that because of the whites moving in, the animals were moving out, and they had to attempt some sort of means of the Indians having an income. So if they got money for that land, they could invest it in England and have annuities for the Indians. This is what William Claus resented, and he fought Brant on it, and he fought Richard Beasley, and Richard made him as a lifelong enemy. But Brant and Beasley continued to try to get this. What Beasley had done is he brought in Mennonite settlers who in 3,000-acre lots, and they had mortgaged that, and they were paying the mortgage on it. Now, the government suddenly said, oh no, you've got to mortgage all 96,000 acres. That would have been a tremendous sum, almost impossible to raise. But with the help of the Mennonites in Lancaster County in Pennsylvania, who all wanted to come up there, they did raise the money. And they did pay off the government, and Claus was asked to invest it in England. It must have been a sore point with him. But at any rate, there's Joseph Brant. There's a picture of him. He was quite a character, and he tried to look after the Six Nations, and he was involved in problems with Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr was Vice President of the United States, and he wanted to take over parts of Upper Canada. They sent in American settlers who would buy up the townships, and the idea was that when they got powerful enough, they'd declare that area independent and then join with the United States, as it happened some decades later in Texas. But the government, the Upper Canadian government, became wise to that and prevented it from happening. Brant was caught in between, so it makes for an interesting story. When Brant died, John Norton took over. There he is there. He's a wonderful character in Canadian history. His Indian name is Chief Tayunaka Warren. He was brought up in Scotland, but his father had been a Cherokee, and as a small boy, when the British destroyed his settlement, a colonel had picked him up as a small boy and took him back to Scotland and raised him. He married a Scottish woman, came out to Canada with the 65th Regiment, and deserted, went back to Cherokee country. And his son, John Norton, also left, and he wandered down the Great Lakes. Eventually, he was employed by John Askin, if you remember, the great fur trader in Detroit. And when he went to West Augusta, a territory between Ohio and Pennsylvania, he was known as the man from Augusta. And young John Richardson, who was being cared for by his grandparents at that time in Detroit, he was about 5 years old and going to school there, he saw this man, and he thought the word was Wakusta. And when he wrote his great novel about Pontiac's siege of Fort Detroit, in 1763, his main protagonist, he modeled after John Norton, and that's how he came to be called Wacusta. Here is the Scottish, actually a Sir Roger Morton in the novel, who was known as dressed as an Indian and was almost a Superman in his dealings. So this became an international bestseller and put Richardson's name on the map. He was published in 1832. Then the next picture is of William Claus, and this is the man who made life difficult for Richard Beasley and others. And his sidekick was Titus Simons, and these people play a role in the book. It's not really a novel, by the way. It's real history. Everything in it happened. It's what you call creative nonfiction, and it took a lot of research. But Simons was put into Richard Beasley's regiment. He developed the militia in Niagara, and by the time the War of 1812 came along, he was the colonel of the 2nd York, and took part in a lot of the battles in the war. And this Simons came in as his major and made life rather difficult for him at times, working for the authorities.